Discussing today's topic will be our guest presenters, Charles Vanderwall, Head of Security Research with Orange Cyberdefense, and Wikus Ross, Senior Security Researcher, also with Orange Cyberdefense Security Research Center. Then we'll hear from our sponsor presenter, Amit Barakat, CEO and co-founder with Perimeter 81. But now first, let's hear from Charles.
Steve, hello, and thank you for that kind introduction. Hello, everybody. We greet you, myself and Wikus, from Cape Town in South Africa, where it is now 9 p.m. Wikus and I work for Orange Cyberdefense. We're the cybersecurity division of Orange Mobile, and our team is based here in South Africa, in Sweden, in England, and in France, and we report into our headquarters in Paris. Please take a moment to connect with us on social media. I've listed our Twitter handles there, and I'll list them again in a moment. We'd love to keep the conversation going with you there and to hear your feedback. Greetings also, Amit, and thanks for having us on board in this podcast. We're very privileged. So our presentation today is titled Identity is the New Perimeter. And we're going to be exploring the role that identity and mobile phone security play in this emergent zero trust paradigm. Once again, our Twitter handles are there. Please connect with us. And I want to start by presenting or describing a problem and the corresponding solution that have emerged over the last 20 or 30 years of the internet, and that have kind of brought us to the point where we're having this conversation here today. So there's a journey really that we can describe that's almost as old as the internet, but perhaps found its momentum first with the dot-com boom of the late 90s and early 2000s, where suddenly businesses started to appreciate the power of the internet, the power of the web, and examine how they could exploit that power to make their businesses and their people more efficient. And that sparked then for the first time the idea that people could connect from anywhere to the systems and platforms that they would use to do their day-to-day jobs. Shortly off the back of that was kind of a second wave of business drivers in the form of the mobility requirement, whereby really the notion of the road warrior, I think, emerged, and we had this much more pervasive need or expectation that someone would be able to work from anywhere, anytime. That need was then further accelerated, I think, by the emergence of cloud technologies and our growing dependence on cloud. And of course, that meant that the systems that we were connecting to weren't even in the office anymore. And so kind of everyone had to connect to them using some sort of secure remote access system. And then most recently, we had COVID and the lockdowns that happened. And with that, the requirement for secure remote access shifted, I think, from something that was kind of nice to have to something that was absolutely business critical, where every CIO needs to be able to know that his people can connect remotely at any time from anywhere. And that, of course, posed security challenges. And I don't think that the people in this forum need to be told what those security challenges were, but there were several. And as far back as the 80s, the concept of a VPN started being developed as a way to tackle those challenges. So how do we give someone access to a secure internal system over a fundamentally untrusted and untrustworthy public network? And those developments accelerated during the 90s. We saw the emergence of the Gauntlet firewall that implemented triple DES in 94. And then kind of in line with the dot-com boom, accelerated even further with the definition of the IPsec protocol, later PPTP and L2TP, and then finally maybe being sort of best manifest with the OpenVPN product, which implemented SSL and TLS as the security protocols with which to achieve the security objective of secure remote access. And really, I don't think I have to explain to you what a VPN does, but I think what's worth touching on is the expectation that it creates. And that expectation is what Vickers and I term security equivalence, or security equivalency, which is really the idea that a remote worker connecting via the VPN technology would enjoy the same level of access and the same security protections as a worker connecting directly to the corporate LAN. And so the expectation is of equivalency. It should be the same. It shouldn't matter where you are. And hence the secure and virtual terms. But that paradigm had problems. And there were several problems on several fronts from a security point of view. And Vickers and myself did work starting in 2020 through 2021, where we examined a particular set of problems that emerged from the reality that most people were now connecting to the internet via Wi-Fi, and that the Wi-Fi access point itself was untrustable, untrustworthy, untrustable, and enjoyed a privileged position because of its proximity to the connecting host. And in research that we presented at Black Hat in, I think, 2020 and later at RSA, we illustrated a range of threats that emerge from the fact that this Wi-Fi access point has this proximity power, and illustrated how a group of 6 or 7 different contemporary VPN products failed to address those threats. And in fact, we made the argument that because of the privileged position that the access point holds, these products would actually never be able to address those threats. It was a fundamental, I don't want to say design flaw, but an attribute of the engineering of the traditional VPN that prevented it from addressing this myriad of threats. And basically in that picture you're seeing there, the red dots are the threats that aren't being addressed. But I would encourage you, if you find this interesting, to visit our website and look at the research we did for RSA and Black Hat. It's clearly published there. And not only were there these the specific kind of technical issues, but a wave of thinking started to emerge that's maybe best captured under the notion of the Jericho Forum. And Jericho Forum started in 2003, and basically it was a group of people that started arguing as far back as that the perimeter is dead. There is no point anymore in making a distinction between your external and your internal network. We can't keep those walls up. What we need to do is tear the walls down and architect our networks and our access securely from the ground up, so that we're no longer dependent on the gauntlet or on the bastion or whatever it is that protects our networks. And then there were 2 security incidents that kind of really captured the zeitgeist. And the first happened to Google. I think it was actually in 2009, where they got breached allegedly by the Chinese under something called Project Aurora. And under Project Aurora, the Chinese had found a way into Google's network and really taken them for a bit of a ride, including getting access to source code. And it was, I think, quite traumatic for Google. And they set out then to apply the principles of the Jericho Forum and engineered something that they termed or described as Beyond Corp. It started out as a series of white papers in which they described their own journey towards a perimeterless architecture using something called identity-aware proxies. And later they evolved the Beyond Corp ideology, which they shared very generously. They evolved it into a set of products that you now actually engage with them for, called Beyond Corp Enterprise. And then at about the same time, a second very traumatic security incident took place, which was the compromise of the security company, the security giant, RSA. And in this compromise, the attackers, also state-sponsored, allegedly managed to find their way into the RSA network via pretty traditional spear phishing attacks, and sort of wound their way through RSA's architecture to the point where they could get to the RSA token seed servers. And you all remember those little RSA dongles that were almost a badge of honor, that corporate road warriors would carry, and they would flip these little numbers. Now, those numbers were linked to your identity as a user by a secure token, an ID, a number. And the hackers were actually able to access those numbers and in that way pivot their attack to other corporations that were using RSA for remote access. And collectively, the journey towards the requirement for kind of ubiquitous connect from anywhere to anywhere, the emerging, I think, realization that traditional VPNs had been architected for another era and weren't fit for purpose anymore. And then finally, these quite traumatic security events have heralded in a quote-unquote new era in which the topic du jour, if you like, is zero trust. And so I'm going to hand over to Vikas to talk you through what that actually means.
Thank you very much, Charles, and good day to the audience. On the topic of zero trust and the introduction that Charles gave is that, one thing that's clear is that connectivity, everybody needs to connect into a network to get access to resources. And for for anything that's worth mentioning is that zero trust by default, everything is actually remote access, because in the zero trust world, we don't really care where the connection's coming from, where it is going, because the way it's architected allows for the connectivity to just sprawl throughout through the enterprise in a set designed manner. Charles touched on the whole idea of identity-aware proxies. There's the concept of secure gateways. And ironically, these are concepts that were borrowed from, as far back as the 90s. But now with a lot more sophistication and a lot more controls, granular capabilities, and applied in a very specific manner to allow access to your resources, irrespective of where you're coming from. But with the whole, hype and this excitement around zero trust, there's unfortunately quite a lot of acronyms being thrown around. And sometimes that can add some confusion because they all sound the same, but somehow people discern different definitions to them. And I'm just going to quickly touch on that just to set the stage. Where zero trust, the ZT aspect, is actually the principle, the philosophy, if you will, the mindset that you have to consider. And that's where Charles was touching on the deperimeterization. And this is where it's embodied in saying the static network perimeter needs to be done away with, and we focus more on your users, the assets, and the resources. Zero trust architecture uses ZT principles to help you create a plan in which you're going to implement these principles, and it speaks to the relationships between these entities and the resources and how they interact with each other. On top of that, your zero trust maturity model adds further a holistic approach to taking 5 pillars that's identified, namely identity, data, device, network, and application workflow, and how you can use these pillars to actually get towards your zero trust architecture. And it's important to mention that zero trust architecture is quite an abstract concept to the most part, because no single business will have the same architecture. It's important for the business to actually define their own solution in the way that they're going to use that to serve the business. And that's why these models are just that, models. It's ways for you to get a roadmap and start your process into implementing zero trust into your organization. Zero trust network access, however, is more of a framework that uses zero trust to implement an application-centric view of resources and how you map entities onto that network. And you'll normally hear ZTNA mentioned in the same breath as secure access service edge type conversations, which talks about the whole hybrid cloud and how to get access to that, combining concepts like SD-WAN, your secure gateways, CASB, cloud access security brokers, firewall as a service. But in all, it talks about the whole zero trust aspect and how to get all these different cloud environments, on-premises environments, and how to get them to talk to each other and how to apply those principles. But in essence, we still need to define zero trust itself in a simple terms. We unfortunately don't have time today to go into much detail, but there are about 7 tenets as described in the NIST SP 800-207 document. And I'm just going to break it down to you in a very, into these three concepts. And you've probably seen these concepts used before, but basically talking about making sure that whoever's trying to access a resource, the entity that's saying, I want to access that resource, that data, that workload, or that service, I only have the bare minimum amount of privileges to do that. In other words, not have too much and just have access to everything. Is clearly defined and clearly set. And also with the same idea of that if a breach would happen, that you are prepared. You actually know that this environment is segmented, it is contained, you have an audit trail, you have a history of how this happened, how did this occur. And if the attacker manages to get into your environment, it is contained and should not be able to spill over into other aspects of your environment. And then finally, authentication and authorization is a key element here, where every transaction needs to be able to say, do you have permission? How is your permission defined? Where did you come from? How do you authenticate? And we're going to look into that just now. And this brings us to the whole concept of identity inside Zero Trust. Remember under ZTA, I mentioned the 5 pillars, of which identity is one. And this is a key driver for ZTA, is that identity matters when we talk about processes and people trying to function inside your organization, doing work, because everything is clearly classified, everything is tagged, and everything should be reachable by only those permitted to do so. So to perform access control on that, you need to know the subject that's requesting it. And ultimately, with identity-driven model, the identity has attributes, and that attributes are ascribed to a unique entity inside a context, in that context, in that organization. And authentication is the process by which an identity is established through a provable assertion that was given to the system saying, "This, I claim this identity, and here's how I prove my identity." And based on that, we are able to use, eventually with the optimal level of Zero Trust deployment, we should be able to have dynamic policies where, based on the authenticator types, based on the context in which the transaction was done, that request, that action was done, also within the device state from which the connection or request originated, even threat intelligence about the state of that device, let's say antivirus, or maybe even association with your XDR solution like that, knowing that that's a clean device and it is up to date, and the state of that software that's running there is also up to date, meaning there's a high confidence ascribed to that identity in doing so. And this could be done dynamically with all your policy engines, etc. So looking at authenticators and the role authenticators play in such an environment, and becomes quite important quite soon in the process, because you want to get into the network, and thus an identity needs to be established. And authenticators is typically, there are three types: what you know, what you have, and what you are. And the beloved password, I think, is due date is expired a long time ago, and memorized secrets can take you only that far. And phishing is showing us that it's so easy to compromise that. And the addition of additional factors has actually surprisingly helped the password methodology survive up till now, but it's no longer good enough. And expanding on that authenticator type is the role of the mobile phone. And mobile phone has actually taken quite a important role in this, and it's started off as early as introduction of SMSing of a one-time code, etc. But the mobile phone is now being relied upon quite heavily in this authentication process, because it can actually facilitate all these different kinds of authentication levels, thus adding quite a high confidence that the authentication being provided, those factors or those assertions, are actually strong. So if the phone is playing such an important role in this, then obviously there must be quite a reliance on the integrity of the platform that's providing that assurance, right? So how secure is your mobile phone? Well, if you have to think about an attack, or how would an attacker approach this, you will realize that the attack surface actually is quite large. So here's like a little brainstorm exercise that we put together saying, like, if we have to go after a specific value of interest, what do we have to consider? And if you really think about it, there's quite a lot that an attacker can go after and what the defender needs to consider, right? So just this, if you look at that middle column there, there's quite a lot that you can go after and how you can target it. But let's say the attacker knows I need to go after that authentication value, that cookie there that's highlighted there. We have to consider the fact that maybe they wanted to do phishing, but they realize phishing is going to be difficult because there's MFA involved, right? So now the attacker have to shift his approach, saying I need to now go beyond just getting a password. I actually have to steal that token value, and I have to consider what the phone and the mobile phone or the MFA authenticator has to offer. So all of a sudden, the phone also comes in to this whole equation as part of your attack surface, right? Unfortunately, over the last decade, to their credit, and they sometimes get quite a lot of criticism, Google and Apple have moved the needle quite substantially when it comes to mobile security. The investment is starting to show, and it has to, because it's a moving target. And for all the effort, I believe they've done quite a good job of it, especially this whole idea of root of trust that they've established. Now, if we have to just quickly look at what iOS has done, their ecosystem is quite proprietary. They control from the start to the end, the hardware, software, everything. And their approach has brought them thus far. But I think one thing which they've actually excelled at is the whole way that they've designed their system on a chip with their secure enclave element that they introduced to actually protect the key material and part of that identity of that device that goes with it. They had to engineer quite a lot to get that far, right? Because they know what is at stake here, and the way that they're positioning the phone to actually help build a strong identity. Other aspects are involved here as well. The whole developer ecosystem, applications that need to go through a rigorous process of verification, vetting, and ultimately getting signed and encrypted for that device. There's an application sandbox that we'll touch on later, and the way it manages and limits what an application can do. And also, if a biometric or PIN is enabled on your mobile phone, then by default the data and your applications are encrypted, even though if it's at rest or even being executed. So that's how far that ecosystem goes to actually protect what's going on that device. Looking at Android, they take a slightly different approach, a more open platform, but they're relying on third parties to do their handset manufacturing and to push that operating system into the customer's hands. But they're becoming a lot more prescriptive of what is required of that environment. For example, the trusted execution environment is something that's akin to the secure enclave, and it helps perform a similar task to establishing a strong identity, a device identity, and protect all the key elements on that device, and thus making it sure that we are working with a trustworthy authentication mechanism. Also, similar application development lifecycle, probably a bit more questionable about their app screening at the Play Store, but they follow a similar thing. Unfortunately, the ecosystem is a bit fragmented due to all the manufacturers. So not all devices have the same attestation level when it comes to device assurance. But the higher end modern Android phones definitely live up to the expectation and is comparable to what Apple is offering. So coming back to that application sandbox point, it's a limited environment in which we operate, and the application is controlled, gets access to resources and controlled by these APIs. So the application needs to get permissions from the operating system, and ultimately they need to be, the user needs to grant them those privileges. And this application sandbox which is frustrating many of the attackers. Though the attackers do know what they have to do to break free. And I'll leave that now to Charles to take us through to that part.
Thanks, Vikas. So we've seen that there's this journey that's taking us inevitably towards new architectures for accessing business systems. And we've seen that those new architectures depend on strong multi-factor authentication, and that in turn, by and large, depends on the integrity of the user's mobile device. Now, in theory, zero trust can and ought to be implemented with a lot more granularity, as Vikas laid out. But I think it's fair to expect that many implementations are going to really, really leverage this mobile phone. And as Vikas said, the good news is that the mobile phones, both architectures, are actually astoundingly robust and resistant to the kinds of attacks that we would expect to see on a normal desktop PC. And because of this sandboxing approach, it's very difficult to, for example, compromise one application, let's call it your authenticator, from another application, let's call it your chatter. So what an attacker would have to do is ultimately to root the device, which means to take control of it at its most lowest operating system level, which is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. But if you were to accomplish that, that does give you God privileges on the device and would allow you to do things like steal key material and access SMS and would do all the things an attacker wanting to bypass or subvert multi-factor authentication would want to do. And that in turn is going to require basically what we would call RC, or remote command execution, type exploits against the mobile phone, which are very few and far between. In fact, up until about last year, I wouldn't have said they were feasible at all. But our team tracks a whole lot of factors across the security landscape. And one of the factors we've been watching for a long time is the notion of attacks and successful compromises of mobile phones. And you'll see that little orange line at the bottom of our kind of systemic factors graph there, which speaks about us which indicates us starting to observe these attacks in the wild on a significant scale, And sort of at the end of 2020, we started saying, hang on a second, this is actually happening. It's not just, a hypothesis anymore. This is a real thing. And it was happening mostly for a very specific reason, which is that governments worldwide, for various reasons, want to get onto individuals' phones, either for surveillance or for law enforcement reasons or for political leverage. And those governments have gone to specialist companies, one of which is called the NSO, which is now sort of quite infamous for offering these capabilities, but there are several. And buying from them the skills, the frameworks, the tools, and the exploits required to compromise specific users' phones remotely over the internet in exactly the way that our threat model describes would be necessary. Now, these companies like NSO, but again, there are others, they generally emerge from what we call the cyber military complex, which means that they not only come out of military and intelligence backgrounds, but also tend to sell back into, and there's this sort of virtuous cycle. And what that cycle really does is to start with a requirement by a government to get onto someone's phone, to drive a demand for professional teams that can do this kind of hacking, who in turn need these exploits, these root level root level, God level exploits. And that in turn drives a market for the development of those exploits. And just to give you an idea of how rich that market is, one company, which many people are aware of, is called Zerodium, but again, there are many, is paying the exploit developers on the, if you like, on the open market, as much as $2.5 million for an exploit like that. So that's partly shows how difficult these exploits are to develop, but it also partly gives us insight into the kind of disruptive effect that this industrialization process can have. And what we think is that once you see that kind of money flowing through an industry or a sub-industry, it has the potential to really subvert the security paradigms that we would have held to be true. And so while on the one hand, we're saying with some confidence that mobile phones are extremely difficult to hack, we're also pointing out that this hacking is starting to happen. And it's being driven by a very lucrative industry, which is developing these exploits. At this point, pricing them beyond the level where they would be valuable or affordable to a criminal. But systemic factors like scale and the osmosis that drives technology knowledge out from these specialists, but also the demand to be able to bypass multi-factor authentication, we think creates a sort of a convergence. So I've been a bit sort of ham-fisted in presenting that, I think, but my point is this, that there's this emergent capability which is investing in the ability to hack phones, and there's a requirement emerging in the necessity for bad guys to compromise mobile phones in order to bypass strong multi-factor authentication. And we posit that in the next few years, we're going to see those two systemic factors colliding to the extent that the mobile phone's security is going to become paramount to the security of your new zero trust based architecture. So what does this mean in summary? Well, I think our message today, and hopefully, we've been able to share some insights with you about, how zero trust works and why it's necessary. But I think our two takeaways are clear. The one is that the systemic factors that have driven us towards the adoption of zero trust paradigms are going to persist. So not only will the technology persist, but really those drivers are going to keep pushing us in that direction. And that includes the adoption of multi-factor authentication. And I think it's safe to assume that that's going to be predominantly done on mobile phone. Then with regards to the mobile phone, what we're saying is this: the traditional password has been failing us for years, and it looks like slowly but surely it is actually going to go away. At the same time, we've got criminal elements that are massively invested in being able to compromise our networks, being significantly enabled by the free flow of cryptocurrencies, and they're not just going to give up when things get harder. And so to raise the bar on them, we implement 2FA and MFA via our mobile phones. And I've already pointed out that we think the technical difficulty, the technical barrier to entry for hackers compromising mobile phones is going to be pushed down by the capabilities that emerge from this cyber military complex. And the result of that is going to be that we're going to have to start thinking about how we assure ourselves that the mobile phones that our users are using are properly configured and patched up to date. And folks, that was our message today. I hope it's been useful and interesting to you. Thank you again very much for having us. Please, again, take a moment to connect with us on social media. And Steve, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Okay, fantastic job. Thank you very much, Charles and Wikus, for an excellent presentation. I want to let our audience know that we're going to take questions at the conclusion of our next presenter, our sponsor, Amit Barakat, CEO and co-founder with Perimeter 81. So over to you, Amit.
Yes, so hi, Steve, and thank you very much for presenting me and Charles, and of course it was a very interesting insights and info that you've shared with us. And today I will present you about Perimeter 81 and what we see from our customers, right, about implementing zero trust in reality. The company, just as a quick background, I'm the co-founder and the CEO. I'm coming from a strong technical and product background. I served in the intelligence forces, and after that studied computer science, worked for IBM for many years, and started the Perimeter 81 a few years ago. Today we have about 2,200 customers that are utilizing our platform to consume security and networking over the cloud. And it gives us a lot of insights. And what we see is there are specific trends, strong trends in the space, and COVID accelerated it. And I'm sure that everyone can easily connect to it. But employees today are working from home, and resources are moving to the cloud. And basically speaking, the internet is becoming the new corporate network. Rico's discussed about zero trust, transform everything to everyone to be like accessing remotely with remote access. But this is, I think, also a side effect of the fact that the infrastructure is developing, the resources and the people are everywhere, and the internet is the new corporate network, as I mentioned. On the other hand, we also see, and we encounter it every day, that CISOs and CIOs and head of ITs are suffering from increase of security solutions. We call it tool sprawl, which impacts negatively on the ability to consume effective network security, because you have many different solutions, many management dashboards, many alerts, and you don't know where to start from and where to put the attention to. And this is basically continuous feedback that we're hearing from our customers and every engagement that we have, that the internet de facto is the new corporate network. The attack surface increasing significantly. The use of devices that everyone brings from home, right? And the increased complexity of running an effective and manageable cybersecurity posture, even though there are many more tools, right? It creates a very significant threat, and what leads to what we read every day about cyber attacks and the impact, and the fact that it's a very big concern in our everyday life. Now, we call that 4 main items as a cyber complexity. And zero trust is a concept, right? That I think there is consensus about in the market. But the question is how you basically relationalize it and transform it into something that companies truly can implement, migrate, and adapt in their everyday life. And one of the core principles, at least in Perimeter 81, is having a single platform that consists a single management platform, a single network that exists in the cloud edge instead of an on-premise equipment, and a single agent that is deployed on the devices, in order to create a holistic platform in order to develop security and networking together as software. Okay, so move away from hardware-based solution into a software as a service platform that can really adapt and implement more use cases and more security services, and to be delivered to our customers relatively easily and quickly. And I would like to share an actual example of one of our customers, right? That Postman. Probably many of you have known about that company. A very high growth, very advanced technology company based in San Francisco and all over the world, over 500 employees, growing very, very rapidly. And this is an example for a company that implements the future of of IT and cybersecurity. They enjoy from the fact that they don't have a heavy lifting legacy network to maintain and manage. And by the fact that they've implemented Perimeter 81, which is a platform that is driven by software, right, focusing on two main use cases. I would say the first use case is remote access, and the second is internet security with our secure web gateway solution. We're able to focus the policy, the security policies, and deliver a unified security to every of their employees, right, regardless where they are, not matter where they open the computer, they have the same security posture. And because it's a software-based solution, the implementation is very quick. Not necessarily all our customers, we have more than 2,200 customers, not necessarily all of them are going all in on day zero. Customers that have a more legacy network that they currently maintain, the advantage of it, right, you can think about Office 365 and Microsoft Exchange, that you can slowly migrate part of your organization, maybe start with third parties, with supply chain, and then the development, and cloud, and on-premise. And you can do that growth, right, and basically to migrate off the legacy security tools that doesn't longer educate to the modern workforce, where you have firewalls that are protecting empty offices, where the employees are outside the office and resources in the cloud. And instead of multiple vendors and multiple appliances and multiple management platforms, able to unify, right, network security and cybersecurity to be delivered from a single management console, a single network, and a single agent. Specifically, Perimeter 81, right, we have gained great success and great adoption. We are focusing on software-based solution, right, and software development, product development. That's what drives our growth. We're selected as leaders in the ZTNA report by Forrester, and I will leave some more time so we can ask some questions. I see that we have many questions, so I will go ahead and review some questions. Or Steve, you'd like you to read a question and we're going to answer?
Very good. Thank you very much, Amit. Excellent presentation. You're right. We do have a lot of great questions and some comments too. We want to thank our audience for participating in the presentation. So before we all get started, I also want to remind you that we have PDF presentations in the console and also a feedback survey that we would greatly appreciate it if you could complete. We'd love to hear what you think about this event and how we can improve on others. And let's start with a first question here from Robert, who says that zero trust is almost always positioned as a technique to mitigate risks within an organization. But what risks do the presenters think it introduces into an organization? And maybe Wikus, you want to start us?
Thank you, Steve, for that. Yeah, that question is a very good question by the audience, because zero trust, especially for an organization that has already an existing infrastructure, and that's most of these organizations already, they've already invested in their environments heavily. They've already got, everything set up and they understand it well. Upending that and introducing something new can be a challenge. And if you look at the maturity model from the CISA, I think that's I mentioned that on the slide is the ZTMM section. There's actually a CISA website in which they talk about how to get the maturity model going. One of the things that's mentioned in that is, zero trust needs to have a strategy in how you want to accomplish it. And ultimately, you need to first understand what in your organization it is you need to, get into the zero trust solution. But the challenge will be always, and the risk that the question is highlighting is that you can quickly, flip everything from working to not working. And zero trust is not necessarily something that you just deploy and turn on. It is something that has to be put a lot of thought in. There's a lot of commitment that comes into adopting this. And depending on the size of the organization, it can take quite a while. And that's why selecting your vendors, selecting your partners is increasingly important in understanding what it is you want to achieve. And I think it's breaking it down into bite-sized chunks. This is a multi-year process. And I think that's why you'll hear sometimes people talk about your zero trust journey. It's a 3, 4, 5, maybe longer journey. And I think it's an evolution that needs to be adopted. It's nice and it's easy for me to talk about this in front of the audience, but people that's going to do this are the ones that actually have to make it work. So I think, like many of the challenges that we have in our industry, these type of things is well suited to solve problems, but it can create stability issues and impact the business if not deployed correctly. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much. Jeremiah has a question here. He says, security aside, what is the cost savings associated with transitioning a traditional hybrid cloud using VPNs to a ZTA? While zero trust seems incredibly promising, getting upper corporate management on board with upending their entire security model is quite the monumental task. So what did you?
Yeah, I will jump in, Steve, and address that question. Actually, it's a great question. I think that the change is inevitable. Cloud and mobility are here to stay, and on-premise VPNs are not longer advocate for this world, and you'll have to move away from it at some point or another. One of the great advantages of modern ZTNA solutions that are basically covering that use case and implementing their service based on the zero trust principles is that that kind of solutions are usually don't require you to go all in on day zero, but rather than slowly grow with them and migrate. And the cost initially can be very, very low. Like think about migrating to Office 365. But as you see more value and it increases security and it increases productivity, then you are enjoying more value, but it costs a little bit more. But in what we've seen, that eventually, if you factor in the cost of hardware maintenance, deployment, the time that you invest on the management, you have up to 40 or 30% savings over the course of 3 years.
Okay, thanks very much,
Steve. I would add to that, if I may, something that Vikas and I realized when we were doing our research into the security problems facing traditional VPNs, is that I think there's a lot of fake efficiency in the way we build networks. In other words, what we noted was that if you do something wrong from the beginning, then what you end up doing is you end up layering more and more controls to mitigate specific risks. And I don't have the numbers, I couldn't say, but we have the strong impression that in many cases, by the time you've laid on all these additional security controls to reach the risk level that you're comfortable with, it may very well have been better for you to architect things correctly from the beginning and maybe spend a little bit more upfront.
Good point.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. Number of people have asked, can I buy zero trust? Who'd like to?
I would just
sure,
say
Vikas has got an answer.
Yeah, the short answer to that, unfortunately, is no. And the reason why I'm saying that is not because zero trust is a new product, because it's not a product. It's it's something that each business have to find for themselves. And that's the nice thing about Zero Trust. And I think there are many questions about, getting board and executive to, buy into this idea. And that's exactly that. Zero Trust must serve the business, give it the agility, and give it the ability to evolve into something better. And the cloud, hybrid cloud, and all this new fancy blinking lights that we've got is there to assist you. It's your creativity and it's your problem space that you need to own, but you understand your business better. So do not believe that you can just buy Zero Trust, deploy it, and turn it on. This is a journey. This is something that you have to architect into your system, and you're guided by principles, you're guided by a plan that not necessarily have to be a all-encompassing plan, but as Amit said, you can take a section of a business unit, migrate it across, or with new products or new solutions that you roll out for your business, start off with them and slowly but surely onboard everything to there. It's not necessarily a one bang solution, but no, I don't think you can buy Zero Trust, and I would love to see a Zero Trust solution that fits everybody.
Okay, thank you. James is asking, so if you were to start a brand new company today, what would you recommend as a starting point for a Zero Trust implementation?
I can chime in. That. Yeah, I can chime in.
It's probably the best person there.
I think that we've shared, like, for example, a use case of Postman. When you start a new company, then it's the easiest, right? You don't have legacy and you don't need to train, again, your employees from the back. What I will do is compare the leading SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, platforms, and to see which one is more appropriate for your work, and start with them. The advantage that it's a software-based solution, you don't need any hardware, you don't need to deploy it anywhere. It's just like working with Office 365, but for cybersecurity. And SASE vendors like Perimeter 81 are growing very rapidly in matter of product development and new features and more security things in place. It's not like it's something that wouldn't end, I believe, in the next 10 years, but this is a great starting point for you.
Okay. Thank you. We've got time for maybe a couple more. We'll try to squeeze in here. Christoph kind of has more of a comment here, but says, once you have, and mainly what you are is stolen, then you're lost, especially concerning biometric, fingerprint, palm, or face information. Anybody want to comment on that or expand on that?
I mean, I can throw in a view. It's not a very informed view, but so firstly, one of the advantages of something you have is that when it's stolen, you know that it's stolen. So it's one of the big advantages of, for example, enforcing authentication via a token or a phone. With regards to something you have, your biometric qualities, I agree with that concern. I think it is notionally a concern. I think technically stealing someone's face is hard. And it's not something that's done on the sort of scale that stealing someone's password might be. So, for example, we have seen efforts to, fake up a face to trick iPhone's, face recognition. And there are attacks like that have worked. And I suppose that would be equivalent to stealing someone's face. But these are attacks that are difficult to scale and quite easy to mitigate against, I think.
Yes, I would even encourage everyone to move away from. Charles has mentioned about the vulnerabilities with mobile phones and that they're being used to steal MFAs and things like that. So I think really in the next phase we'll see MFAs are moving from SMS and phone into more like biometrics, which are much, much more secure.
Okay. And let's see, we have another question here from Hadil. who wants to know practically, how do we ensure our personal phones are protected from being hacked or impacted by these exploits?
I can respond with an opinion on that one, Steve, and it's one of the few times in security where I think you can say that's easy. Because really all we need to do is ensure that you've got a decent PIN or password set on your phone, to choose your phone platform wisely. So I think there's a big difference, without wanting to name names, but between the sort of big, well-named, reputable vendors and other smaller, less well-known vendors. I think that plays a role here. Then choose your password and then make sure it's patched. And I think that's kind of the thesis that Vikas and I were trying to drive. I think where it becomes challenging is if you're a business that has thousands of employees and a bring your own device paradigm, then the question is, how do you ensure that their devices are patched? But for the individual, you'll get the pop-up, you accept, your phone gets patched, and I think that's 99% of your problem solved.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. Unfortunately, that's going to be all the time we have for this session. Again, a reminder to our audience, please complete the feedback survey if you would. We'd greatly appreciate it and let know how we did today. And we want to also let you know that you look out for an invitation for our next webcast that will be coming up shortly. Thank you all for attending today's Black Hat webinar, Identity is the New Perimeter, brought to you by Black Hat Perimeter 81 and Informa. Shortly after this live event, we'll send you an email so you can access this presentation on demand. And on behalf of our guests, Charles van der Walt, Head of Security Research, and Wikus Ross, Senior Security Researcher with Orange Cyberdefense, and our sponsor presenter, Amit Barakat, CEO and co-founder with Perimeter 81. I want to thank you for your time and have a great day.